Welcome to the guest house. He's one of America's great exports, navigating his way through the North, one Home of the Week article at a time, the digital editor of NUVO magazine, a man on a mission to change the way Canada relates to the exceptional, and most notably, one of my bosses, Ben Dreith. Welcome to the program. Thank you for coming on, the second guest ever to appear on the podcast.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Just real quick, though, and this has been every first grade teacher, second grade teacher, it's Dreith.
Dreith. Oh, my gosh. And you know what?
German.
I knew I had a 50% chance of nailing
50-50.
it. I even gave it a Google, and it gave me a few NFL players, and they said, hey, you're gonna want to go Dreith. But okay, there we go.
For a long time, my tagline for everything was, famously not the famous NFL referee.
Yeah.
I've actually met some people in airports and stuff who see my name and they're pro. I guess he made some Super Bowl call that made like the Patriots lose or something, and they see me and they're just like, oh yeah, this guy, they're like your uncle or something, and they want to like fight me.
Yeah. You're on the no flight list.
The no flight list, they take NFL seriously in the U.S. So.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. So I will have some questions just about sort of your background. You're obviously, obvious to you and I, coming from America to Canada, being a part of NUVO magazine now as the digital editor. Of course, this podcast, The Guest House, we talk about kind of the new media space. So we've talked about sort of video projects, documentaries, podcasts with Michelangelo, our first guest. And today I'm very, very interested in talking about kind of the old media landscape of magazines, print media, and how we're transitioning into sort of that new media space. But before we jump in, I just want to give people kind of a background on you. Could you kind of offer a summary of your journey to your position and kind of what a digital editor does on like what your responsibilities are with NUVO?
Sure. Well, I'll go chronologically. I mean, I've always been involved in media in some capacity, like high school newsletters and clubs. And, I did some writing for the music journalism in college and college newspapers. I've always been super passionate about writing and ideas, as opposed to, some people enter journalism through more niches, right? Like if you're an architect or something, you'll do architectural writing. And of course that has the benefit of extreme specialization, and you can, get super to the point. The benefit of, coming from the writing angle is it's allowed me to be super flexible, and make big pivots, which NUVO has been for me, because before I was focusing mostly on literature and philosophy. I was pretty deep into academia. But it's interesting, like you said, mostly these days I've been focusing on design. I have this joke with my dad. He's always been really into design and architecture. And when I was little, he and my mom would like drag me and my little brother to all these open houses and furniture stores, and we hated it. I mean, we did hate it for a while, and I always acted like I hated it. And, we would complain. We just wanted to play our Game Boys, and go home. But I think it's kind of stuck with me, and definitely really informed like my ever deepening interest in design. There's always, I think, like little clues kind of that our paths give us, like where we're going. Like it's almost kind of literary, right? Like when you're reading a book or something, you look out for these little clues that might come back and help you understand where the author is going, what they're trying to get at, and all these kind of things foreshadow these events. And once you get there, it really makes sense to you, right? So that's kind of how the writing that I've been doing lately has affected me. Like 2 years ago, I wouldn't have really thought that I'd be doing this, but now that I am, it makes a lot of sense. And, I just like continuously am like more passionate about architecture and design, and as well as, some of the other things I write about, some car stuff, fashion design. And I really, like the Canadian landscape too, because I think that, everyone's in conversation with each other here. That's something that I learned when I was in school here too, right? Like people in the East Coast and West Coast are really talking. So that's great. As far as what being a digital editor means, it's, it's a new thing, right? So it's like you're still navigating what exactly that is. I have to do everything from writing to doing, Google ads, Google Analytics, all sorts of, search engine stuff. So there's really a sort of technical savvy that you have to do. And this was something that I had to learn, right? So I had to take some courses and stuff, because it's not something that you can really just bumble around and figure out. There's a lot of I mean, when it comes to the internet, everyone's kind of always figuring everything out a bit, right? You don't have the trove of like ancient knowledge, or when it comes to internet stuff, but there definitely, you have to do some work, I think, to get the technical aspect of it. So that's definitely half of what I do as well.
Hmm. Now, the SEO analytics, obviously trying to optimize the search engine algorithms. What was the like? Maybe because that's probably the part of the job that people can relate to the least from the outside looking in. So, if you could kind of pull back the curtain, how do you kind of manipulate an article or adjust to kind of optimize the AdSense, the traffic on it, etc.
Well, if I had the absolute secret to that, I'd be living on Mars or something, right? But because it is, the way that I look at it is that you have to imagine that the search engines themselves are readers, and that you're writing for them to understand things, which is kind of creepy, but it is the way it is, right? Because in order for things to be on Google, the machines have to read everything essentially. So they're reading the images, they're reading the text, so it's potential answers for them. So if someone asks them a question, they're going to provide this, and you have to, just as you would write something for an audience in order to make them understand, or them to, I guess, like something. If machines can like something, you have to think about it that way. And there's a whole different language that you have to speak in order to achieve that.
And it all plays a purpose, but one thing that stands out to Nuvo as opposed to a lot of other websites, and I'm sure this is something that you're always glad to hear, is the look of the website. It's been a complete revamp, really, and I know that's been a big project, making it look as aesthetically inviting as possible, as streamlined as possible, as clean as you can. What was that process like? Because it's so integral in the digital space, especially with such a trove of options. You click on an article, if I can't navigate it as easily on my phone as I can on a PC, or vice versa, you're just going to move on to the next option. So, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how you've kind of completely transformed, you and the team transformed Nuvo's website during your tenure.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use the word like completely transform, because it's always in conversation with the magazine itself. And we did keep some of the elements of the old one, like a lot of white space.
Mhm.
So I'm really thankful that we have the print magazine. And it's such a great tradition, stemming back 22 years, when Pasquale Cusano founded it. And uh, just having that as a baseline has been great. Of course, we want to keep it clean. We don't want to be too complicated with it, because it's more about the content and the images than it is about showing off how clever we are with graphics, and animation. Um, so yeah, it was a play of those two factors together, and of course we want to keep it clean, right, and as aesthetically pleasing and minimalist as possible. So
Mhm.
I'm happy with how it turned out.
Now, of course, we want the conversation to be about Nuvo, and like I said, also want it to be a conversation of how media outlets at large are either succeeding or failing in their kind of attempt to pivot into a modern platform while still obviously holding on to their roots. So before we get too into those weeds, I just want to give you a chance, put the open the curtains, put the stage lights on you, and give you a chance to plug any projects from Nuvo, big or small, moving forward that you're kind of excited about, that are upcoming.
We're constantly in flux.
Mhm.
Things that are constantly coming across my desk that I am excited about. Right now, I'm working on producing and directing a video with a pretty amazing, well-known Vancouver photographer, about their life and work. I can't give you the name yet, but watch out for that, because I think it's gonna be really amazing.
Amazing. And do you have, again, before we jump into some new media stuff, do you have a favorite article, not just online, but a favorite article that you guys have produced this year? One that comes to mind for me is obviously the Errolson feature, and then the Mario Rigby feature as well, who I knew nothing about until I read it, and is such a fascinating guy. Were there any that kind of stuck out to you that maybe really captured the year?
Yeah, I think the Errolson Hugh was just amazing, right? It was such a time when he had really, I think, hit that exponential curve of his renown, I think. And I think that we kind of told that story right at the same time that he was really, really expanding out of the very small niche that it was in. I mean, that was going to happen either way. I'm not saying that we but a catalyst, but definitely we were kind of right at the wave, I think. And the way it turned out was great. Norman Wong is a phenomenal photographer. And it was great too, because Sandra Zarkovic, who is our art director, that was, I think, the first magazine that she completely conceptualized. And so that was nice, because it kind of like with that, and then with some, kind of the website changing over, really sort of marked, I think, like almost a new era at the magazine. So I think that has a lot of significance. For me, I did an interview with Ian Williams in the spring. I really enjoyed doing that. Ian's a great guy, and he's really smart. And it was one of the last interviews that I got to do in person. So I guess that really sticks out in my mind. Grant Harder is also an amazing photographer, and it was done, kind of right when lockdowns and stuff were starting. So it was really unsure. So that came together. The whole fall issue was pretty amazing, just because we pushed all the summer stuff back into the fall. So we really had this like massive issue that we got to spend a lot of time on. And there was a lot of poetry in that, which is something that we hadn't really done before. And we were really unsure about how it was going to come across. And the response that we got was just phenomenal. We got like poets from all across Canada, a couple international poets to kind of weigh in. And they really, even though all of it wasn't about COVID, you could tell that was the feeling. And I think they just captured the moment in such a great way. So that's going to be a really special issue for a long time to come, I think.
Now, relating directly to that idea of pushing the envelope with experimenting in terms of writing, adding poetry into the issues, trying out new projects, just experimenting in general, you work for a publication that has a really established voice and a readership that has come to expect certain topics explored in a fairly specific way. How difficult is it, do you think, for media outlets to kind of balance the idea of innovation and authenticity?
Yeah, so I can't really speak to other magazines, but we have a really dedicated print readership that's been reading us for 20 years. Some people more than 20 years. The benefit of having online is that you do get to tap into a different readership, right? We do view the online magazine as being, a somewhat separate entity, right? It's not everything going into print is going online, and vice versa, right? So because we have the two outlets, we're able to appeal to wider demographics than we usually would, right? We have people even in South Asia and Australia and Europe that read the magazine too, that wouldn't probably get to read the print magazine, just because we focus so much on the Canadian audience. I think because of that, we really get to project some of the great people doing great things in Canada internationally. So that's of course like a huge plus, I think, for us, and also for the people that we're featuring. So yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's really you have to finesse it, right? You can't give too much to either one, I think, or else kind of both suffer. So it's a really, really fine balance.
And so you mentioned, obviously, just for logistical reasons, the digital site tends to lend itself to international readership more than a print magazine would. Are there other ways that you found the readership tends to differ? I know there's only so much you can see from the online analytics you're given, but is it tend to be a younger readership? Does it sway either way in terms of gender? Any sort of specific differences you're seeing there?
No, we're super proud of our gender split, especially because it's pretty 50-50 for both the print and the digital. And kind of like it's even tending towards more of a 50-50. I think a bit before online it was more women for a bit. But now we're like very close to 50-50. I think it's within like 2%. So yeah, that's something we do definitely get some younger readers on, more younger readers than we would probably for the print magazine. But that being said, we also have some people who are 65, 75 reading our online magazine, which is kind of unusual, I think, for the new media space. So we're really proud to be able to bridge those gaps, right, and not and not really, we don't want to make anyone feel excluded from it, right?
Yeah.
Of course, there's only so much that we can cover, so everyone's always going to wish we probably did something else. But
Mhm.
we're proud of the fact that we can reach as many people as possible.
Now you were kind of looking back fondly on the interviews you were able to do in person. Now let's take us back into a COVID-free world, whenever it is down the line. Is there any particular creative or from any realm, a writer, architect, artist, etc., that you yourself would really love to have that chance to interview, to be back in person speaking to?
Oh, so who if I could interview anyone in person right now, would it be?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I've gotten so used to doing it over the phone that I don't know if I could do it. I'd have to go and kind of like cover my face or something. So I don't know. I mean, there's some great people doing stuff right now.
Mm,
I guess just for the last week, Anna Lomax is a great designer. She works in London and New York. She does all sorts of creative direction and object design and installations. Tosin Ashinowo and Krisha Amua
mhm,
are also someone who they did those masks that were super high tech and futuristic. I can send you the link to them.
mhm,
Kind of the intersection of fashion design and industrial design, and they're so
mhm.
baddass and elegant, and
No,
they
I'm not
both have their own
familiar.
design work going on. Yeah, I'll send you the link so you can put them in the show notes if you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they're both, one Ashino is an architect, and she's also doing some awesome things in Eastern Africa, I believe.
Hmm,
Interested in sustainable work. I'm also interested in Michael Green, who is in Vancouver. He's an architect. They're doing some awesome stuff with mass timber.
hmm.
So what that is essentially using timber in ways that like concrete and other like steel were used for bigger buildings. They built the research lab for wooden architecture in Prince George. So they're
Okay.
really kind of at the center, Michael Green and his firm of sustainable architecture. And yeah, I'll probably end up talking to him either way in the
Mhm.
coming months. But honestly, any of these people I'd love to sit down with, and then going forward, it's it's infinite. As soon as I can start sitting down and talking with people, I'm going to be taking so much advantage of it. I used
Yeah.
to kind of be like, oh, maybe we could just do a phone one. It'd be easier than going here or going there. But now, like, I've realized how much better it is to just speak with a human being face to
Yeah.
face in order to tell their story.
Yeah, and I was just gonna ask, like, what are the and of course, every interviewer, every writer has their own nuanced differences that they find. What are the some of the differences you found that you're able to gain from an in-person interview rather than now you've kind of got the contrast of doing it virtually? Is it just that ability to kind of like actually connect with someone one-on-one, or is there more to it?
Sure. I mean, it's even as basic as just being able to tell the reader what the affect of the person was, right?
Mhm.
Um, there is such an element to spoken word that we try to as an interviewer try to put onto the page for the reader to make the connection with the subject, with the interviewee,
Mhm.
and without being able to use body language and affect with the word. It's you have to do a lot more context, a lot more background has to be done.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's the difference between reading something that's kind of lifeless with something that has life in it, right?
Mhm.
So we're all trying to find new ways to imbue that life, and I think that in the long run it's going to help people just because it's made us like all good innovations, it's coming from difficulty, right? So
Yeah.
I think that everyone's writing is probably going to be better after this because we've
Mhm.
had to not rely so much on. I'm sure you've experienced this as well, like not have to rely so much on description, right? We have to find better ways to contextualize facts
Mhm.
and words themselves and statements. Even I've had to do some written interviews or emailing back and forth with people who are busy all the time who would usually sit down, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a whole new paradigm with it, and
Mhm.
we just gotta roll with the punches.
It's just an entirely it's really just an entirely different approach to storytelling, really. But and you mentioned with innovation, it's kind of related so intimately with difficulties and challenges. And so, has there been I guess over your whole tenure, you can include the COVID aspect if you'd like, but if there's something, a particular project that offered a lot of challenges, maybe something as big as reworking the website, or just one particular interview that was challenging. What's been the biggest challenge for you as digital editor?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has to be the first thing you mentioned, the website.
Yeah.
Just because I know quite a bit of stuff about search engine optimization and various web practices, but I'm not a computer scientist at all. I'm
Mhm.
not a designer, so it was really difficult to do that. You have to put a lot of trust in other people when you're working with things that you don't know a ton about, um, and
Mhm.
so that's not difficult for me, but it's definitely something that you have to kind of ease into. We have such a major archive online,
Mhm.
so it wasn't, it was conceptually challenging trying to get like what we talked about before, to get the feel right, have it be loyal to the tradition, but also just purely trying just all the ins and outs of getting all the stories onto the new website. It was
Mhm.
incredibly difficult. Sometimes it was like putting a square peg into a circle hole, right? And it was definitely one of the biggest projects I've ever managed. It took months, and we're still kind of finding things that we need to tweak, and it's constantly evolving. So
Mhm.
without a doubt, that was the most challenging thing I've done.
I can only imagine. And you mentioned earlier that you don't speak, you can't speak for other magazines. I'm gonna try to force your hand, but only in a complimentary way. No, you mentioned that sort of evolution with the online site. Are there other publications, other print publications that are modernizing that you look at? Like, to me, it's always an American GQ or maybe an Esquire or someone like that, that you look at and think, wow, they're really entering into this new age of written media well. Is there a site that you look to almost as inspiration a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, just a kind of a roundabout way to that question. I mean, multimedia is an interesting word, right? It's even more interesting now because I feel like the more digitized we become and the more that we're absorbing everything through our screens, the boundaries between different sorts of media start to kind of blur together, right, into this big blob of
Hmm.
data. So of course, Instagram has set the tone for so much of the industry in general, and it kind of worries me a bit how much they've been shifting towards the commercial features of it. So I think that's kind of something we can talk about that more too, but something we're constantly trying to kind of fend off, I think.
Hmm.
Um, Let me think. I really admire, one thing that comes to mind was I think it was New York Times Magazine did the short story thing, and I think it was last summer, and they had this kind of interactive setup for all these different writers, and they were writing, I think, responding to the times, and it was really nice looking, and there was cards, and it was kind of its own separate website, if you saw it, but once you got into it, it was still long form, right? So
Hmm.
I think that's really exciting. I think we really can't lose long form writing. I
Yeah.
mentioned sort of graphics and stuff, and I think that all that's great, but I think that at the end of the day, um, long form writing is the best way to really think about something and to really, be told a story and to really admire something. And of course, video is doing great things too, but I think it's, works with similar principles, right? Like you need
Yeah.
to spend time on something and absorb it. And if things like help you do that better, that's great. But I think that, we can't get too far from that as magazines, or else
Yeah.
we'll start to sort of lose what like kind of made them magical in the first part, which is really the space that they give you to think about something and think about your own opinions about it, and really, it's cliche, but sort of like get into someone else's shoes or
Yeah.
perspective.
That's that I yeah, you take the words out of my mouth, when because I've had we had a couple people that I went to school with have a business podcast, and so they came on to kind of talk about new media spaces with me, and they were kind of a little bit, I wouldn't say skeptical, but they wanted to know what the appeal of long form print is. I said the same thing of like, it forces you to actually process an idea and actually really think through every angle, every quote, both as a writer and a reader, right? So, like podcasting right now, it's a great long form medium for discussion. But what, like, you might respond to this and ask me something, And I'll give you the first thing that pops out of my head, which is not the case with a long form piece. And same with, as a reader, your opinion you wrestle with a lot of different points of view through a 1,000 word piece. Even a 500 word piece is a lot less fleeting than an IGTV live or what have you in sort of a new media digital space. But I do want to ask, because you mentioned briefly the whole idea of this behemoth Instagram monster that has its hand in every realm of media. It's tough to ignore, right? It's such a huge entity, but like you said, there's a way of, I don't want to say like cheapening the product, but it's different. It's a different medium. What are your thoughts on utilizing things like an IGTV or interviews that you see on Instagram Live or these sort of new medium um, outlets? What are your thoughts on using those for an old form media?
Well, I think we have this tendency today to talk about these things like they haven't been around. Like we've had video for a long time. Like video isn't anything new, right? It's just the way that we're processing it.
Hmm.
So I think that the technology isn't that new. It really is sort of just the way that we're flipping through it. I think that one thing that really all people appreciate is it about magazines is, you talk about echo chambers all you want, but I think people do want to learn about new things. I think that
Hmm.
people are trying to kind of get out of their spaces. And one great thing about magazines is that for the most part, that within the magazine itself, online magazines included, that a lot of times people are curating it as opposed to algorithms. I think that that's an important thing to maintain. Algorithms are super important, and for me, like it's a great research tool. Like my research when it comes to interior design or architecture or art, all sorts of things have just been exponentially sped up by these platforms.
Hmm.
So it's kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning, is that the machines themselves are sort of reading, and we have to take that into account when we're writing stuff. But
Hmm.
I don't think that means that we need to just be making all of our content for the machines, because to me that's just it's just the height of irony, because the machines are there to help us find things and help us do things more easily, right? And they're tools at the end of the day.
Hmm.
And media is a tool. So I think that we can't get too lost in just kind of like focusing on the tools themselves, right? And we have
Hmm.
to maintain committed to storytelling. And yeah, and I think that, like I said, the way that we spend our attention is new. The actual technology really isn't, right? So
Hmm.
that to me just means that storytelling is just as important as it has ever been.
I love that point of, yeah, that the online magazine, the physical magazine, is curated by human, not by sort of an automation, and that's something I've never thought of. And appropriately, it's something that it's engineered that we don't think about that, right? So that's a really interesting point. What I'm thinking is looking even past my generation into sort of a Gen Z generation that's now coming up on uh, these digital platforms that move even more rapidly, that push you into this sort of algorithm that keeps you hooked on as long as possible. Is there do you believe that there's sort of a long form space for them as well? Because again, I'm an optimist. I think there's always, like you said, there's people who are always going to be interested in learning more and doing so at a very in-depth level. Do you think there is a strong sort of Gen Z readership?
In general, just like people reading. I mean,
Mhm.
I'd be deluded if I said that long form reading was the same as it was 100 years ago, right?
Mhm.
And I think that, like I said with video, it's like I think that certain videos, like you are reading it, right? Like if you're watching a long thing, like you're interpreting it. I think it's all about the intention behind something.
Mhm.
So obviously, like people are reading probably less overall, but I don't think that people aren't reading, right? I think that a lot of maybe more traditional people in media have this like opinion of Gen Z, that they don't read long form things, and that
Mhm.
kind of in a backhand way kind of excludes them, right? Like it's like, well, if you're saying all these things about me, then I'm not going to do it. Like to me, You know, and that's understandable. I get that, you know.
Yeah.
But I guess it's kind of difficult to speak demographically about interest on like a purely aesthetic basis. You know, people that are interested in cars are 100 years old and they're 8, right? They're even younger. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so whether or not, you know, I do think that the way that certain social media like saps attentions are obviously, you know, there's massive trials going in the States, right? Trying to figure out what the place of social media is in society.
Hmm.
So I think that we just need to maintain a commitment to learning, and to education, and to like understanding that, you know, you can really learn from anything, right? You just have to kind of take a little bit more time. So I guess I would say that, you know, Gen Z has it a bit hard just because they're really at the crux of this huge shift in technology that is,
Hmm.
you know, going to define the next century. So, you know, I think that maybe, you know, we figure out those problems and then we can kind of decide after that, like, you
Yeah.
know, do we keep long form? I think long form will stay around forever because,
Yeah.
you know, I feel, you know, everyone that sits down and reads something long that they enjoy, like they enjoy it, right? Like there's something for everyone. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I think, you know, it remains to be seen.
And I forget who had the quote. It was on Women's Wear Daily. I could find it, throw it in the episode notes. But it was an interesting quote, just kind of speaking to long form and print articles, just discussing the idea that there's more false information swirling around faster than ever now, and so there is sort of this appeal to younger demographics of reading a long form article that is fully sourced. You're reading quotes that are actually contextualized by a story, by the interviewer and the interviewee. So there are things that long form offers that no other medium can, that also appeals across the board, even getting out of the conversation of just generationally. But just speaking to, you know, the different challenges of writing to different audiences, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, like, obviously we write for a publication that is a luxury lifestyle magazine. And, you know, and we're writing in a time now, we're coming up on a year that it's a very financially constrained time for a lot of people. Are there any difficulties in kind of navigating both content and tone of a luxury magazine during this sort of weird time? Or is it just kind of best to think, you know what, this is what we are, and there's no reason to sway from that necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, the central tenets of NUVO were laid down, you know, way before I got here.
Hmm.
You know, Mr. Gusano is an indomitable guy. He's always kind of gone where people, you know, say that he shouldn't go. You know, when NUVO first came out, it got, you know, it got some flack. People didn't think it was going to last at all, but you know, lo and behold, 22 years, it's still here. You know, I
Hmm.
think it's as vibrant as it ever has been. Obviously, you know, I've only ever, you know, been in Canada for, you know, less than a decade, so I wasn't here for the whole time of it. But to me, it's just as vibrant as it's been. And I think luxury, you know, and that kind of indicates to me that luxury has always been sort of a challenging thing in Canada.
Hmm.
I think mostly just because the word was born under such different circumstances.
Hmm.
You know, even in like, you know, parts of the US, I know that, you know, it was always kind of associated with the sort of, you know, European sort of pomp and circumstance, right? And
Hmm.
you know, we that's why we focus on like, you know, craft and um uh you know, I think it's important to sort of like transcend the goods and the commerce and, you know, talk about the
Yeah.
culture and the art and yeah, it's obviously people are struggling, and you know, our content's always free online.
Hmm.
You know, and we think that whoever wants to read stuff should be able to read about these amazing craft people and companies. And at the end of the day, we just, you know, we want to give people platforms as well. And I think that we have a really unique space to do that. I
Hmm.
don't think that many people are really doing what we're doing, you know. So you know, I think that there's more to be. I think you know, we're doing good. I think as
Hmm.
far as that goes. Also, you know, one thing that luxury really means for me, and I think it does mean something for me that it does for other people, and that's what I've been trying to capture a bit, is that, you know, to live the good life is not to just like consume, consume, consume. And I think that also goes into, I mentioned earlier that I've been a bit disappointed with Instagram shifting towards the store model, because to me,
Hmm.
it's just, you know, I think that with sustainability, which is something that we've been focusing on a lot, there's a way to push people in the right direction when it comes to when it does come to purchasing things, right? To
Yeah.
push them towards things that are, going to be, a little bit more expensive, sure, but like high quality, and not just for
Mhm.
the sake of branding. That's something that I've wanted to get away from a bit. Like there's these big brands with long traditions, and there's like the craftsmanship is amazing, right? But just brand, like the cult of the brand, is something that I try to sort of like dissuade people of, and that's why we're always focusing on smaller brands,
Yeah.
and that's always something that's really conducive to the Canadian scene, right? Because
Mhm.
feel like that a lot of the brands here are just doing like great things, but they're you know a bit smaller scale sometimes, and I think that's a great thing. I was talking to Cedric Burgers the other day, who's he has an architecture firm, and he was telling me, that one of the biggest things they're focusing on is trying to, keep things more local, and sometimes it makes things a bit more expensive, right? But
Mhm.
I think that when you bring in an ethical component to purchasing, like the meaning of luxury has to change, and that's not something that people were thinking about 100 years really. They
Yeah.
think about quality, but like the sustainability, or even 30 years ago, right? Like even
Yeah.
20 years ago. So I think that if we don't bring sustainability into an idea of luxury, like we're all gonna have a problem. So I'm really trying to make sure that we bridge that gap, and like I was talking about before, like we do have a young readership, and I think that when it comes to enjoying art and enjoying music, right, these things are sorts of luxuries in a certain sense of the word that
Mm.
transcend, um, economics. Which is, I don't think that, everyone, we're always having to deal with the economy, and what
Yeah.
that means. So I don't want to pretend like we're like existing in some, like transcendent space, but
Mhm.
we do try to, have something for everyone.
Well, yeah, what I'll say is, you're right. Luxury. I mean, I do think it's the maybe the right word. It's just it's so pejorative now, where it's more related more to opulence. But the way that Nuvo frames luxury is quality, right? Like if you look back on that Errolson article that we referenced earlier, and you can find that online, he talks about how each of his designs are made to like survive. He almost talks about like it's an armor to take on with you in life to survive the everyday. And you look at an acronym jacket, that's something that's going to last you, that could last you 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And for a narcissistic plug as well, I'm working on a story about Prince Charles and how there's a tidbit that was recirculating coming up on a year ago now, last February, how he owned two coats, right? That's luxury, how you can have these quality garments, but that's not mass consumerism, is owning uh, two coats for the past 30 years. Those are the types of things that the magazine promotes. And you talk about luxury, it's a lot of independent creatives that we are that the site really promotes. So I mean, from that aspect, there's no shame in that, right? Is it more moral to promote an $8 sweater that everyone can afford that's gonna be gone in 6 months? A lot of people would argue no, right? But let's say we're out of this situation. I asked you the person who you would obviously want to interview, and you had a set of names ready there. Has there always been, particularly when you're moving into, I know, like you said, you've been working on a video project that you can't get into specifics quite yet, but is there a sort of event that you guys look to, any sorts of things, maybe like a either fashion week or TIFF, stuff like that, that you've kind of always been drawn to, that you've wanted to do something with?
Oh man, that's hard. Right now I'd like to go see my grandma. Uh, so
Yeah,
I miss concerts. So like I'm thinking pretty small.
yeah,
I'd like to go to my favorite bar for like a couple hours.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
it's hard. Like I think my world is like shrunken like a little bit in the last year. Um, that's a hard one. For NUVO too, I love IDS, right? And I've always wanted to go to the one they do in Milan. So,
Mm,
I'd say that just as a sort of like a kind of a cop out answer, but not really, because I'd love to do that.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'd love to get back to Europe, and
Mhm,
there's just such great things always happening there in design and fashion. So
mm.
yeah,
A-
trade
And
shows.
s- so what have you replaced that time with during quarantine, when you're not the digital editor of Nuvo? What is kind of taking up your time during quarantine? Is it more hikes? Have you taken on baking? What's going on with Ben?
Writing, man. I'm just getting back to my roots.
Yeah.
Just lots of writing, lots of reading. I've been, trying to, pretty maddened by just the news all the time. I feel like
Hmm.
in various ways. So one thing I've been doing is, a lot of people too, just trying to like take control of my health.
Hmm.
Um, and exercise more. I moved actually just because we were living, my partner and I living in a really small apartment that worked fine. We were both always working all the time and traveling,
Hmm.
but it just got to be too much. So we actually did move, which kind of sucked during a pandemic. So we had to be
Yeah.
really careful, obviously, about it. And
Yeah.
wearing masks like when you're trucking a couch is terrible. But
Hmm.
I'm grateful that we were able to do that. And just like us, we were living in a super tiny apartment, so it was like
Hmm.
micro for two people. So we're at home both 80% of the time. So
Yeah.
we had to do a move. Other than that, lots of walks.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of walks. Lots of walks. Like yeah, some road trips around. Just
Hmm.
very lucky to be in British Columbia. I wouldn't be anywhere else in the world right now. Just this,
Yeah.
just such beauty and such community and such. I wrote an article in the spring just kind of fawning over the sense of like civics that
Hmm.
this province constantly displays. I'm constantly
Hmm.
impressed and super grateful to be here.
Oh, that's amazing. And you mentioned sort of that feeling of community throughout the whole country. Now you hadn't done, like, obviously you were born and brought up in the States, and you went to, it was UBC for your master's, correct? Is that right? Yeah. And so what are some of the, obviously there are the tons of cliche differences, but in terms of, have you noticed any big differences in the ways that media publications operate or approach storytelling in Canada versus the States?
Um, I don't think there's anything that's too big, honestly.
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like so many of them, I mean, to be frank, so many of them are owned by the same companies.
Mm.
I think, right? Like there's these big media conglomerates that are just functioning. So a lot of the stuff is the same.
Mhm.
Like I said before, one thing that I did notice at UBC was that more so than any university that I was associated with, people knew each other all over the country, which was something that was so bizarre to me when I first came here. That people in British Columbia were like, "Oh yeah, like oh I also know this person from Nova Scotia, right?" And I was just like, "What? Like, isn't that like 4,000 kilometers away?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, but it's all kind of, all in the scene, right?" So
Yeah.
scenes here, just like you get a lot of mileage, a lot
Yeah.
of mileage on the scenes because I have some friends who do stuff in California and they don't even know someone who's doing something very similar in San Diego sometimes,
Yeah.
right? So I do think that there's an interface. It's difficult, like being a national magazine and having such a massive country, especially during COVID, right? Is that
Yeah.
I rely a lot on people in Toronto and people in Montreal to do the stories, and I'm grateful for that.
Mhm.
Um, I can't really, I don't think, offer to you any super tangible differences.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think that the English language is very similar in the United States and Canada, and that
Mhm.
plays a huge role in the way that we tell stories, right? Like
Yeah.
language is the root of it. So
Mhm.
that allows for a lot of interface.
Now, we've looked sort of through the lens of old media, new media, looking forward, and now to end it off, Ben, I just want to get your thoughts on any tentative goals, not specific stories, not specific events or guests. We're not going to be optimistic with what the landscape of 2021 will look like, but what are some general goals, maybe a single one, maybe a couple that you have for NUVO this year? What is the team hoping to accomplish?
Well, one thing that I'd also be remiss not to mention would be that we've really had to pivot away from travel and restaurant writing.
Mm.
And one thing I'm looking forward to is for things to open back up, so some of like my amazing travel writers and amazing restaurant critics can get back to doing what they love.
Mhm.
And they have great audiences, so I'm hoping that that happens for them and for us as a magazine, because travel and food have always been such a big part of what NUVO is. And I
Mhm.
think that when you're talking about demographics, is that younger demographics, that's definitely kind of what luxury means to them, right? Like people are spending their money on experiences. So I know that's been hard for a lot of people. So I'm looking forward to that.
Mm.
I'd also like to do some traveling myself.
Yeah.
Like I said, if not, if anything else, just to get to Denver and see family. So
Yeah.
um, other than that, we're just taking it a month at a time. Writers like yourself are constantly giving us great stories that we wouldn't have even expected, and pleasantly surprised. And you know, I want to keep producing videos and you know, just keep reaching out to new audiences. The future is pretty wide open right now, and that's exciting, but also, you know, terrifying. So we'll keep going and keep writing and keep and you know, keep the churn going, keep the digital machine fed. So
That that is all we can root for. Now, before we close out, Ben, where can the listeners, where do you want them to follow? Where can they read your work? And what do you want them to look into as they're finishing off this episode?
well, one thing that I would say is that, you know, our print magazines all go online eventually. I'd recommend you pick up a copy. You can order them on our website, because I think that, you know, one of the essential things and what is so different about NUVO is that we have this beautiful glossy print magazine that's going to last forever, right? It's like a book. It's like having a book. Like, really, there's very few better feelings, I think, in the world than holding a magazine that, you know, you've worked on. And you know, and we try to like pass that feeling off to other people. I'm sure that, you know, just how good it feels to hold a magazine, I think. And that's just the glamour of that is amazing. You know, you can follow us on all of our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Flipboard. Also, I do a weekly column on Saturdays. It's Home of the Week. It's highlighting, you know, 80% Canadian architects and then a few international ones as well. We have a great house from South America that's coming up this Saturday. I'll give you a preview on that, and you can find that. We've yet to, you know, have I can give you the link to the page of the Home of the Week stuff, but it's pretty easy to find on our homepage. But yeah, just hit the website, and we have a newsletter too that keeps you informed if you're not someone who likes to go and, you know, search out the website all the time. Yeah, so, you know, we keep it pretty simple, and we think, you know, our readers like that. So just trying to bring it, like I said, as many people into the tent as we can. So yeah, NUVOmagazine.com.
NUVOmagazine.com. Ben Dreith, not Dreith. Don't get it twisted. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, producer Gary, for setting this up for us. And thank you for all our listeners for tuning in this week. We'll see you next week.